Hello, welcome to the Sideboard here at the StarCityGames.com Team Open in Baltimore, part of the SCG Tour, brought to you by Ultimate Guard. Nick Miller alongside Pro Tour champion Steve Rubin here for a Deck Tech. How you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well, thanks man.
Now we normally do a bunch of team spotlights at these team opens,
Okay.
but when there's a very cool deck, we like to highlight it as well.
Sure.
And you played the Black-Red Hollow One deck. We had you on camera for the modern portion.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, I need to see this deck. I need to know what's going on.
All right, well here it is.
So where did you get this deck, and how have you tuned it from what you saw it as?
This is a deck that I actually lifted off of a Magic Online list that I think top rated a PTQ, and it was interesting to me because it was all Hollow One decks I had seen were like many colors, played Vengevine, like some of them played Become Immense Battle Rage, some of them played Bushwhacker, Burning Tree Emissary, and I liked the look of this deck because it's much more streamlined. You're just two colors. You have just good threats and good burn spells.
Right. One thing when you look at this deck, it's very consistent. There's not a lot going on like the other early versions of the Hollow One decks. This one, it's very clear what you're trying to do. And I think what's interesting is the threat package the deck has now, going away from things like Goblin Guide and Swift Spear and all that. You have a new standout here, Flameblade Adept, going alongside Bloodghast, Hollow One, Gurmag Angler, and then Flamewake Phoenix. Two very off-the-wall red threats, but look very good in this deck in practice. Yeah,
they're both kind of cards that, when I first started testing the deck, I thought that maybe I would just cut them, they would be bad, but Flameblade Adept is kind of like your Delver of Secrets, so to speak. When you have it, your deck's just really good. Menace is actually surprisingly effective in Modern. I like to joke that it's basically unblockable.
Sure.
A lot of the times, it's really hard for them to interact. And Flamewake Phoenix also, with the flying, gives you this kind of evasiveness that's really nice, because not only are your threats kind of, other than the Adept, you're immune to removal, but you can really get around opposing blockers.
Yeah, outside of stuff like Lingering Souls, those cards are going to be very hard to block for most decks in the format. So you get to augment those with the very powerful explosive draws that Hollow One can have, thanks to all your rummaging spells from. We've got Cathartic Reunion, we've got Faithless Looting, which you see in just all kinds of busted decks.
Kind of super gross.
Tips you off immediately. This deck's not playing fair. And then Burning Inquiry. This is the one that we had a lot of fun with on coverage. Everyone's shuffling their hands together, figuring out what cards they're going to discard. How good is the Inquiry in this deck?
It's kind of funny because the Inquiry, it's kind of tough to know how good it is because sometimes it ends up kind of screwing you over. But it's pretty solid in the deck. I'm not going to say it's definitely the worst of the discard spells, but you do play it because it allows you to play a turn 1 Hollow One for free. It gets your graveyard goodies in the graveyard, like your Faithless Lootings, your Flamewake Phoenixes, your Bloodghasts. And it also just allows you to make an Adept really, really big and hit really, really hard. So it's pretty much just gives you a ton of velocity is what I would say, and that's pretty important in this deck. You're trying to kind of burn your opponent out.
Right, and then you have Street Wraith to go along with this package, helping you get Hollow One out, pumping the Flamebait Adept. And that's something that, this deck can attack for a lot of chunks of damage early, which is something, outside of busted draws from those early Vengevine decks couldn't do. Kind of set up for a big attack. You get to chip them away. Yeah,
you get to chip them away, and you also have a pretty consistent game plan of trying to get an Angler or a Hollow One into play on turn 1 or 2, even turn 3, because these cards kind of are very hard for a lot of decks to kill. A lot of decks are playing Fatal Push, where a lot of decks are playing Lightning Bolt, and your creatures, other than Flamebait Adept, are pretty much immune to that. So just setting up to get that consistent damage or chip damage, like you said, can both lead you to burn out your opponent. Which is kind of the big thing about this deck, is that you play 8 burn spells with the Fiery Temper and Lightning Bolt with a lot of card selection. So a lot of games end up, you just burn your opponent out, essentially.
Right, you were telling me earlier in the day, you just wind up winning these games with a bunch of burn spells, which you didn't expect as a way to win with this deck. But with how much damage you can get in with these creatures, you legitimately can just burn them out in the late game. Yeah, and you also have multiple haste cards. Like the Bloodghast and Flamewake Phoenix are both hasty, and they both kind of operate in that space that a burn spell will operate, where you're just trying to get your opponent low and burn them out. So there's kind of multiple ways that you find yourself burning your opponent out. Okay. And as a 2-color deck, you kind of have a limited sideboard, but you have a bunch of hard-hitting cards in the sideboard, which I think is relevant.
Yeah, I've actually been surprised. The sideboard has been very, very good. And typically when you play a graveyard deck, you're really worried about post-board games because people have Rest in Peace, people have Cage, stuff like that to disrupt your graveyard. But this deck actually, can beat graveyard hate pretty consistently, especially because Cage isn't particularly good against you. And we also have like a sideboard that is kind of augmented towards the metagame right now, and it's performed pretty well for me, surprisingly.
Right, for a deck without white, you still have a bunch of haymakers here.
Yeah.
Starting off, you've got your Ley Lines of the Void for, the other graveyard decks, but you also have Blood Moon, one of just the strongest cards in Modern.
Yeah, Blood Moon is a kind of card that when I played this deck, like the Moto list didn't have it, so a lot of people that have even seen this deck list don't know that you have Blood Moon. So that can make it kind of a blowout. The plan with the Blood Moons is generally you want them against the big mana decks. You want them against Valakut, you want them against Eldrazi. It's not the kind of card that you always board in against a fair deck. Like if I'm playing against maybe a Grixis control deck or a Jeskai control deck, I'll board them in. But it's not a card that you're bringing in every time.
Okay. You've got 3 copies of Big Game Hunter. You've got all this discard outlet already. So this is going to show up good against, I imagine, Death Shadow and things like that.
Yeah, this is the card that really makes your Death Shadow matchup good because their plan against you is to try to get a Tasigur into play or a Death Shadow, and Big Game Hunter just kind of removes that game plan from them. You can play it, and even just a random 1/1 threat, especially if you're discarding it, you get a free card out of it, can be really, really strong. And it's got a decent amount of utility. For instance, I had a match where I played against the Blue-Red Madcap Experiment Platinum Empyrean deck, where obviously having a card like Big Game Hunter is good. So it's got other applications outside Death Shadow, and basically just your ABC Tarmogoyf decks, Tarmogoyf, Grimflayer, and whatnot. So
we saw that card shine in Eldrazi Winter when it was time to just find anything that could kill Reality Smashers and the like. And you've got 2 Collective Brutality, 2 Fatal Push, just cards you expect to see in a black deck. Usually in the main deck for Fatal Push, but here this is your extra removal. Yeah,
the Fatal Pushes help you have additional removal spells, especially against decks where Fiery Temper and Lightning Bolt aren't killing their creatures if they have cards like Tarmogoyf or Scavenging Ooze. Collective Brutality is kind of one of the more narrow sideboard cards. Even though we are a discard deck, it doesn't replace itself like the other discard outlets, but it's kind of like your Haymaker against Burn, and also really, really good against the Devoted Druid Company decks, because you really want to be able to keep Devoted Druids off the board and also take Company out of their hand at the same time. And it operates as, if you really need an extra discard spell against a combo deck like Storm, you can slide it in there as well.
Yeah, you get to bring that along with Thoughtseize against.
Yeah, and you have a decent discard package.
All right. Lastly, Shattering Spree. We all know what this is for: Affinity, Lantern, things like that. It's
for Affinity. A lot of these decks play Ancient Grudge. My sideboard was very stretched, so I decided to just play 1 Shattering Spree, and so you can kill Bridge, so you can kill Cranial Plating.
All right, so how do you like the deck? You've got most of the tournament under your belt at this point. You're off to a pretty good record, too.
Yeah, I think that I'm 8-3 with an unfinished match. So it's been going pretty good, maybe a little bit above expectation. I think the deck is really solid and really fun. If you like graveyard decks, it's fun, but also it really plays out more like a zoo deck. So if a zoo deck, because you kind of are playing your big creatures early and burning them out. So if you're into either of those types of strategies, I'd definitely give it a try.
All right. Well, Steve, thanks for joining me here in the sideboard. We know Zoo is kind of part of your middle name or part of your Twitter name at one point or the other. So.
And I love graveyard decks, so this deck is a lot of fun for me.
All right. For Steve Rubin, I'm Nick Miller. Stay tuned to StarCityGames.com all week long for the action here in Baltimore.
Thanks.